I think something about the time in the monastery, in a way, inclining you towards acting as well. Was there something about you that you went there? But you went there, I think you say in your book, to lose your sense of self, really,
Yeah.
to prostrate yourself
Yeah.
before God, in a way. Although I've read about your time there, I'm still never quite certain why you went there and how long you were there and what a strange life it was for you to live there.
Well, you see, at the Liverpool of that time, you know, the only way out for an ordinary working class boy was through school, with a grammar school and then perhaps university or something like that. I was very impressionable and not very good. There was a lot of missing of school, so I didn't get into the grammar school or anything like that because of the war. And the other thing is, I was very vulnerable. You know, when people were always telling me, I was brought up in a crisis time of deep faith, and deep faith makes people very, very strange. I think it makes them passionate about very ordinary things. So I remember, for example, a verbal felicity thereon, say, of my mother, who would say things like, put the kettle on, Louis, and in 5 minutes, if God spares us, I'll make the tea. As if somehow death was imminent, you know, between actually putting the kettle on and making the tea. And so when Mr. Hart, the headmaster, was telling us, remember, Baker, you are nothing. You are nothing. You know, I didn't have all that much confidence. I thought, well, I'm nothing, you know. And then it was going to the idea of abasement, the idea of being nothing, the idea of confessing intimate things, you know. And then, of course, at the age of, 10 or 11 or something, when I discovered what it was to have a throbber on. So when you went to confess it, and the priest, I've done an impure act, and the priest, who would be smoking 2 caps in full strength at the same time, would get closer when he'd heard that, and his beads would rattle, and his voice would become hoarse, and he'd always say, did pollution take place? And I thought, I said, I was a bit baffled by that. Did pollution take, marvelous word. He said, did you take pleasure? I said, yes, I did. And then I couldn't stop, you know. It's caused a terrible crisis. Because, you know, we were frightened of being run over, mortal sin. And the idea of these ejaculations, which used to be, I mean, a prayer, an ejaculation to God, as opposed to an ejaculation of one's seed. The thing is, you know, that there are millions and millions. You should have asked Richard Dawkins about this, about how many spermatozoa there are. But it wasn't just a mortal sin. I mean, when you spilled your seed, it was genocide. So
you were killing babies.
We were killing babies in their millions. And so the thing is that, you know, when you're absolutely packed with seed, and I was doing genocide sometimes 3 times a day, you know, which was a very hard burden on an 11-year-old
You see, people
boy.
forget today, don't they, how all-encompassing Catholicism was at that time and how it shifted now. You can meet Catholics now and nothing about them speaks of repression or inhibition or concern at all. It all seems to have gone.
Yeah, I believe so. I believe they backtracked on all that kind of thing. But it was so cruel at telling us that we were nothing. And now, apparently, they've ditched purgatory, haven't they, and limbo, and hell.
And there's hardly any confession.
Well, no. I said to a priest the other day, I met, and I said from a distance, because going near them fills me with revulsion. I said to him, do you actually believe in the resurrection of the body? And I must say, to give him credit, he kind of looked around, like old comics used to do, and he said, well, Tom, he said, I think the jury's still out on that. You bet it's still out. Yeah.
And what about, I was going to ask you about, so we talked about that monastery, which was the idea of getting rid of the self. How long were you there?
Well, nearly 6 years.
Nearly 6 years. That's a long
By that time, of course, I had made the leap from a genocide, you know, to chastity and embraced the suffering that brings. And really embraced the whole idea. You know, it was an alternative. It was an alternative existence, wasn't it? You see, there in the monastery, you didn't need to be clever. All you needed is to actually be abject, to have no views at all. And that wonderful trick, you know, they say, listen, when your superiors give you an order, it is God speaking. So no matter how stupid it is, how patently stupid it is, God is testing you. Now, that's a marvelous alibi, isn't it, for treating people badly, you know. We weren't, of course, allowed, when I was in my novitiate, we weren't even allowed to look at each other. And so when we were in the chapel, the only sight you had of anyone was the curves in the back of their neck. I remember a very pretty boy in front of me called Olivier Jean. And I used to have this terrific desire, you know, to stroke the back of his neck. I didn't know what the front of his head looked like because we weren't allowed to look at him, you know. And we were all ejaculating in the religious sense all day long. People were crying out, blurting out things like, God be praised, you know, or think of St. Stanislaus. That was a good one, yes. And so sometimes I'd say, you know, think of St. Wilberforce or something like that. They didn't seem to notice that either.
But when you think now, can you imagine the sort of self that you had that believed all that? Because also when you look back, you were talking about your mother. I mean, she believed it absolutely, didn't she? Right the way through to the end of her life. It informed her existence.
Yes. My wonderful mother said an extraordinary thing that I can recall quite clearly that I overheard as a child talking to her sister. She said, you know, Louis, thank God we're poor. And Louis said, how do you mean, Jane? She said, well, Father Sharkey's been in, and he was saying, blessed are the poor, for they shall see God, Mrs. Baker. And that consoled my mother, you know, it's absolutely wonderful. It's the great paradoxes of Christianity, you know, that's all I know about, the marvellous paradoxes. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. And as Mark Twain said, yeah, and it'll be interesting to see how long they hold on to it. It's all, so it's a way of making poor, ignorant people cope with their misery, isn't it? And then to be giving 2 shillings a week to the church amounted, in my view, when I look back on it, to protection money. A man in black used to knock at the door, and my mother would reach by the clock where there'd be a 2 shilling piece to pay off the priest, who knew how poor we were, you know. But this man could forgive our sins. So my whole... In the tumult of my imagination, death was very imminent all the time. I was nothing. I was abject. And that the end of the world was a desirable state, and heaven existed. And then, of course, was the absence of privacy, because if you're a Christian, there's no such thing as privacy, since God is everywhere. So, and then you've got your guardian angel on your left shoulder. So, I mean, you know, going for a good, stiff, Rabelaisian bowel movement made you very, very tense, because there were 2 big important people there. You couldn't see them, but you believed in them. When I was a novice in my monastery, I mean, we all put on linen gowns in order to have communal showers. And of course, as you can imagine, with the water coming from the ceiling and the side like that, hot water, and there's some sweaty old monk there scalding the young men that we were, or freezing us at his pleasure. But, you know, the bodies of young men in linen shifts probably look quite good to certain repressed people.
I mean, because you feel quite, I think you feel quite aggressive now towards religion, don't you?
Yeah,
I do.
Because
perhaps for what it did to your mother, or perhaps to all the people who bought into it.
We swallowed all that guff, you know, which finally a lot of it has been ditched, apparently. I don't know. But, you know, when I watch all those cardinals all dressed up and think, did I want to put frocks on like that? And why doesn't someone notice that the Pope looks like Uncle Fester? You know, and this whole idea, and so, you see, I prefer the American system, at least. You know, I mean, most of what I look at television is only so that I can jeer and mock at it and shout and annoy my wife about it, who's a wonderful woman and puts up with me. But, you know, they would talk all the time as if they knew things, and we know that they don't know things. They don't know anything. And so but at least in America, it's very theatrical. And you buy into this confidence trick, you know, the more eloquent they are. You buy into it. But we don't have that, do we? I mean, religion on English television or on the radio, I think they said, dear God, terrible.
You said